The whole of what Cora Beale had left in the world came to $74.16, a folded condemnation notice, and the deed to a building the county wanted to knock flat. She was 60 years old. She had buried her husband on a Tuesday, and by the following Tuesday his brother and his sister had taken the house in town and the 2 lots down by the lake, and left her the one thing nobody in the family had ever wanted. They called it Gill's Puddle. The appraiser wrote its value on the estate sheet as a single, flat, unarguable 0. It was the boarded stone bathhouse of the old Alderwood Springs resort, ivy to the roof line, a red paper notice nailed to the plank door sitting on the county wrecking list like a name already crossed out. But on cold mornings a thin ribbon of steam rose from the foundation vents of that dead building, curling up into the frost air as if something down under the stone was still breathing. Cora would not understand what that meant for a good while yet, and what she would finally find behind a bricked-up arch, in a room no living soul had stood in for longer than she had been alive, would answer a question she had carried without knowing she carried it, and it would make an entire county remember a quiet man they had spent 30 years laughing at. Before we go on, take a moment to subscribe, and tell me where in the world you are listening from tonight. She read the condemnation notice, standing at the mailbox with her coat still buttoned wrong from grief. The letter used the word structure 4 times and the word owner once, and the owner it named was her. There was a hearing date. There was a line where she could sign to consent to demolition and save herself the trouble of the hearing entirely. She meant to sign it. She truly did. She meant to sign it, drive out to the puddle one last time so she could say she had, and be gone from this county by Friday, back to nothing in particular, which was at least a nothing that did not have his brother's face in it. The will had been read in a lawyer's office that smelled of new carpet, and Gill's brother had done the talking. Because Gill's brother always did the talking. "The house in town makes sense with us," he had said, not unkindly, which was worse than unkindly. "You've got no children to keep it up. And the lake lots, well, those have been in the family since before Gill ever met you." "And me?" Cora had asked. His sister had slid a single folded page across the table, not quite meeting her eyes. "Gill wanted you to have the Springs property," she said. "The bathhouse. She searched for a word that would not sound like an insult and did not find one. It's his puddle. You know how he was about it. It's condemned," the brother had added. "There's a notice coming. Just so you know what you're signing for. Honestly, Cora, we'd take it off your hands too, only there's nothing to take." "He wanted me to have it," Cora had repeated, holding the folded page. "He wanted a lot of things," the brother had said. Gill was a dreamer. You knew that better than anybody. He had stood, buttoning his coat. "Sign the demolition consent when it comes, and you won't even have to drive out there. Save yourself the trip. There's nothing out there but ivy and a wet cellar full of leaves." "A wet cellar full of leaves," Cora had said. His puddle, the sister had said, almost fondly, almost sad. He loved that awful place. God knows why. And neither of them had said another word to her, because they had already moved on to the boat. 16 years of marriage had fit, at the end, into a box she could carry under one arm. A chipped blue bowl. His reading glasses. A watch that had stopped at some hour she had not been present for. Gill had not been a man who accumulated things. He had been a man who fixed things and put them back where they belonged and did not mention it, and when he died the world had assumed, correctly, that he had left almost nothing behind. His brother had a boat. His sister had a second home. Gill had a puddle. There was one more thing in the deed envelope, and she did not find it until the second night, when she could not sleep and emptied the whole envelope onto the motel bedspread to punish herself with paperwork. A folded slip of graph paper, soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded a great many times. His handwriting, which she would have known in the dark. "Mind the arch, Cora," it said. "The water knows its own. It was always yours." She read it 11 times. She could not have said what the arch was. She had no idea what the water knew. She only knew that he had written it out carefully, in ink, as a man writes something he means to be found, and that the last 4 words of it had gone into her like a splinter she could not reach. He had never talked like that in life. Gil talked about gutters and grades and the price of gravel. He did not talk about water knowing its own, and yet here it was in his own hand, patient as a stone. She told herself it was grief talking on the paper. She folded it back along its soft creases and put it in her coat pocket, where it stayed. Cora had no one expecting her anywhere. That was the plain truth of it, and she had learned to state it to herself flatly so it could not sneak up. Her people were gone. Gil's people did not want her once the will was read. The friends she had were friends they had made together, which meant they were his, which meant they would drift now as such friends do, kindly and completely. There was no apartment holding a room for her. There was no job holding a chair. There was a motel with a heater that ticked, and $74.16, and a condemned ruin nobody else would take. So the building, whether she liked it or not, was the only door in the world with her name on it. That was why she drove out. Not for the water, for lack of anywhere else to be. The road to Alderwood Springs climbed up out of the town and into the foothills through second-growth timber, past a rusted sign that had once promised a grand hotel and mineral baths and now promised only tetanus. The hotel itself was long gone. It had burned in the winter of 1962 and never been rebuilt, and the mountain had spent 60 years quietly taking the resort back, one root and one vine at a time. What was left when Cora came around the last bend and cut the engine was the bathhouse, and it was worse than she had let herself hope. It sat in a leaf-choked forecourt behind a section of chain-link fence that had given up and lay half down in the weeds. Stone, once handsome, a little domed cupola gone green. A colonnade the ivy had swallowed so completely the columns looked like trees. The plank door wore its red notice like a wound. The marble steps up to it were cracked and shoved apart by frost. Every window at ground level had been boarded, and the boards were soft with rot. It looked exactly like what everyone had always called it. It looked like a puddle that had dreamed once of being a resort and had woken up condemned. "All right," Cora said out loud, to no one, because there was no one. This is it, then. This is what he loved. She stood a moment in the cold and answered herself, as a person alone learns to do. A ruin, she said. A boarded-up ruin. They were right about it. God help me, they were right about all of it. The disappointment was not sharp. It was worse than sharp. It was a slow, bitter thing that settled in her chest and made her tired. Some traitor corner of her heart had ridden the whole drive out here, half believing that a man who wrote those 4 words in ink must have left her something more than a ruin. She stood in the wet leaves and let that corner of her heart be wrong. Then she went to look, because she had driven all this way, and because his note was a splinter she still could not reach. The key the lawyer had given her fit the padlock, though she had to work it. Inside, the smell hit her first, wet stone, cold ash, something mineral and coppery underneath, old and strange. It was dark. She had thought to bring a flashlight at least, and she swept it around a great vaulted room that had once, she understood slowly, been beautiful. There were the soaking pools, 3 of them, sunk into a marble floor, each one bone-dry and cracked and full of the small pale wreckage of decades. Bird nests, plaster, a shattered chair. A changing stall along the far wall had collapsed in on itself. Water stains climbed the walls in tide lines. Everywhere was the evidence of a grand thing that had been let die. She stood in the middle of it with her flashlight and her $74, and she almost laughed, because what else was there? She would sign the consent. She would let them knock it flat. Gil's puddle would go back to the mountain and she would go back to nothing, and the slip of graph paper in her coat would just have to be one of those things a grieving man writes that mean nothing at all. That was when she heard the water. At first she thought it was the wind, or her own blood in her ears in all that quiet. She stood still. It came again, from behind the collapsed changing stall on the far wall. Not a drip, not the ordinary trickle of a ruin letting in rain, but a steady, living, moving sound. The sound of water going somewhere. Water that had somewhere to be. Cora crossed the marble floor with her heart doing something it had not done in a week. Behind the fallen stall, where the flashlight had not reached, the wall was not like the other walls. The other walls were dressed stone. This was brick, newer brick, laid up rough and quick to close what had plainly once been an opening. An arch. A bricked-up arch, and from behind it, unmistakable now with her hand flat against the cold brick, came the sound of water rising and turning and running away down some channel she could not see. Mind the arch. His own hand, in ink, patient as a stone. She took her hand off the brick as if it had gone hot. She stood there a long moment in the dark with the note suddenly enormous in her pocket. Then she did the only sensible thing, which was to go back to the motel, because it was getting dark, and she had no tools, and her hands were shaking. And a woman of 60 does not tear down a wall in the dark on the strength of a dead man's riddle. But she did not sign the consent that night. She put the pen down. Stay with me here, because the next thing Cora did is the moment this whole story turns, and if you have ever been handed something the world called worthless, you will want to see where the arch went. Subscribe now and come back to the wall with her. She came back at first light with a claw hammer, a cold chisel, and a work light she had bought with money she could not spare. She had not slept. She had lain in the ticking dark turning his 4 last words over and over. By the time the sky went gray, she had stopped pretending she was going to sign anything until she had seen what her husband meant her to see. The rough brick came away easier than dressed stone would have. Whoever had laid it up had done it in a hurry and without love. Mortar slopped thin, and Cora worked at the top corner until the first brick rocked loose and came free into her hands, cold and damp, and heavier than it looked. Beyond it was black, and out of the black came a breath of warm, wet, mineral air across her face, warm as breath from a living mouth, and the coppery smell rolled out thick and old. She stopped and put her hand into that warm dark and felt nothing but air and heard water running somewhere below. And she nearly wept, because the building was breathing on her hand, and she understood at last what the steam from the vents had been. A dead building that breathed. It had been breathing the whole time, all those cold mornings, and the whole county had driven past and called it a puddle. It took her the better part of the morning to pull enough brick to climb through. She went through with the work light held ahead of her, and she came out into a room that stopped her where she stood. It was a chamber, round, domed, cut and clad in white marble, gone soft gold in the lamplight. And in the middle of the floor was a basin, a wide, round marble basin fed from below, and in the basin the water rose. It did not drip, and it did not gush. It welled up from the center in a slow, steady boil of clear water, turned in the basin, and ran off down a stone channel into the dark, exactly as it must have done every hour of every day for longer than the country had been a country. It was clear as glass. Steam lifted off its surface into the cold marble air. Around the rim of the basin, carved into the marble in letters worn, but legible, ran a date, 1904, and words in Latin she could not read. Cora knelt at the rim and put her hand into the water, and it was warm. Not hot. Warm and gentle, and the exact temperature of a thing that has decided, once and for all, what it is going to be. There was a brass gauge bolted to the stone at the water's edge, an old thing, green with age, and she wiped the face of it clean with her thumb, and the needle stood where it had plainly stood for 100 years. 74 degrees. She sat back on her heels on the wet marble. 74. The number sat in her chest and would not settle because it was the same number to the dollar that had been sitting in her bank balance since the day the estate closed. $74 in the world above, and 74 degrees down here in the dark, welling up clear and warm and steady while the family laughed and the county drew up its wrecking list. She did not know yet what it meant. She only knew, as the note had said the water knew its own, that a bigger thing was still coming. She already understood this was not the bottom of it. Warm springs do that, she would learn later. A true one holds its temperature winter and summer, year on year, because the water comes up from so deep that the seasons on the surface never reach it. Snow could be on the cupola and the basin would still stand at 74. Drought could crack the forecourt and the basin would still stand at 74. Some things hold steady, she would come to understand, because the earth decided they would. And some hold because a person decided they would. She did not have the words for that distinction yet. She only knelt on the marble with her hand in warm water and cried for a man who had told her, in his flat and gutter-minded way, mind the arch. On the wall beside the arch, where she had not looked coming in, a single brass drain key hung on an old nail, bright where every other metal thing in the ruin had gone to rust. Someone had kept it clean. Someone had used it. She lifted it off the nail and turned it in the lamplight, and a small cold question opened in her that the whole rest of the story would spend itself answering. A ruin does not have a clean key. A dead building does not breathe. Who had been coming down here, and how long, and why had they never told a living soul? She thought she knew the answer, and she was afraid to think it, so she put the drain key in her coat pocket next to the note and climbed back out through the hole in the brick into the ordinary ruined light of the bathhouse. That was the day Cora stopped being a woman on her way out of the county. The letdown had been real, and the county's word for the place had been fair, and everything anyone had ever said about Gil's puddle was true right up until the moment she pulled the first brick, and this is where it stops being a story about a ruin, and becomes a story about what a quiet man had been protecting behind it. Stay close, and subscribe if you have not, because the clean brass key was only the first rung of it. She did not know where to start, so she started where a practical woman starts, which is with paperwork. She drove down out of the hills to the county building the next morning, the drain key and the folded slip riding in her coat like two coins she kept touching to be sure of. And she asked the woman at the records counter for everything on file for the Alderwood Springs parcel. The bathhouse, the woman said, in the flat tone of someone who has explained this before. Honey, there's nothing on that but the condemnation. It's coming down. Are you the one that inherited it? I'm the one, Cora said. My condolences, the woman said, and she meant the puddle as much as the widowing and went to look anyway. She was gone a long time. When she came back, she was carrying a box, and her flat tone had gone careful as people go careful when the paperwork has surprised them. She set the box on the counter between them. I don't. She started and stopped and started again. There's a lot on this parcel. Somebody's been filing on it for years. Inside the box were the assays. Cora would count them that night on the motel bed, and there would be 31 of them. One for each year, a private laboratory report on the mineral content of the Alderwood spring water, filed with the county and the state every single year without a gap. Iron and calcium and magnesium and a dozen things she could not pronounce. And at the top of each one the temperature at the source, and on every single sheet in a column that never changed, the temperature at the source read 74 degrees. Winter reports and summer reports, drought years and flood years, and the number never moved. And every one of them had been paid for. Stapled to each assay was a county filing receipt, and each receipt was marked paid in cash, and each one was dated in the same week of the same month, year after year. The first week of a mild month in early spring, the same week every time, as regular as a birthday. As regular, Cora thought, and then did not let herself finish the thought, because her hand had gone to the folded slip in her coat, and her thumb had found the soft creases. "Who filed these?" Cora asked. Her voice did not come out as she wanted it to. The clerk turned one of the assays around so Cora could read the line at the bottom, the line where the source of record was named, the line that made the whole box legal. It did not say Gil's name. It said hers, Cora Beale, owner of record, Alderwood Mineral Source. Every sheet, 31 years of it running back to a spring long before the estate, long before the will, long before anyone had thought to laugh at a puddle, her name, in her husband's careful hand, filed the same week each year and paid in cash so that no bank record would ever have to explain it to his family. "That can't be right," Cora said. "I never filed anything. I never even knew this was here." "Says your name, though," the clerk said, tapping the line with one finger. "Right here. Every year." "My husband must have." Cora stopped because she did not have the end of the sentence yet. "Your husband." The clerk looked at her, and something softened. "Big fella? Quiet? Paid in cash, always the same week, never wanted a receipt mailed anywhere? You knew him?" "I stamped these," the clerk said. 30 years I've stamped these, and never once thought to ask what they were for. He'd come in the first mild week of spring, wait his turn, pay his little fee, say thank you, and go. I figured it was some hobby. She nudged the box a half-inch toward Cora, toward the person it plainly belonged to. "Somebody sure thought it was yours, honey." Cora drove back up the hill with the box on the passenger seat where a person would sit, and could not afterward remember the drive. Why her? The question had gotten larger, not smaller. She had come for what was inside the arch and found the water. She had found the water, and it had only asked her a bigger thing. Why had a man who never once mentioned this place spend 1 week of every year of their marriage driving up here in secret, testing the water and filing it under her name? She had thought she knew everything 16 years teaches you about a person. She sat in the car in the forecourt with the box and understood that she had not known the largest thing. There was more in the box than essays, but she did not find it that day, and I am not going to let her find it yet. Because the county was not going to wait for a widow to understand her own paperwork. That is how these things go. The moment the thing you own turns out to be worth something is the exact moment other people start to want it. Stay with me. Subscribe if this is landing, because here is who came up the hill next, and the next knock on that plank door is what turns a quiet discovery into a fight. The first man came in a truck too clean for the road he had driven it up. He introduced himself as a developer, and he looked at the bathhouse as a butcher looks at a hanging side, and he offered her $6,000 for the parcel. Cash. That week, before the condemnation went through. "Save yourself the demolition assessment," he said, pleasant as a salesman. "The county charges the owner for the teardown, you understand. They'll bill you. This way you walk clean with cash in hand, and I take the—" He glanced at the steam curling up off the vents, and something moved behind his eyes that she did not like, the ruin with the wet basement off your hands. $6,000. To a woman with 74 in the bank, it was a fortune, and he knew it, and he had said the wet basement as a man says a thing he is pretending not to have noticed. Cora had been married to a quiet man for 16 years. She knew what it looked like when somebody was talking around the real thing. "The wet basement," Cora said. "You keep saying that." "Water gets into these old stone jobs," he said. "Rots the footings. It's a liability, is what it is. Frankly, I'm doing you a kindness taking it on. Then why not wait for the county to knock it flat and buy the empty lot for less?" Something flickered in his face, just for a moment, before the salesman came back over it. "I like a project," he said. "I'll think on it," she said. "Don't think too long," the developer said, still pleasant, getting back in his too-clean truck. "That hearing's on the calendar. Once it's condemned, it's the county's to sell, and then you get nothing at all. A widow ought to take the sure thing." You'd be surprised how these things go for people who wait. I'm learning how they go, Cora said, and watched him drive back down the mountain a little faster than the road wanted. The second man was worse because he was quieter. He came 2 days later, and he did not look at the building at all. He had already looked at the file. He said he was a landman, that he worked sourcing for a bottling concern, and that he had happened to see there was a source permit on record for this parcel. And would she be interested in signing a quitclaim? Just a formality, he said, just to clean up the title, for which his people were prepared to offer a courtesy payment. A source permit, Cora repeated. An old formality, the landman said, and smiled with his mouth. Probably lapsed. But my people like clean paper. Sign the quitclaim, take the courtesy payment. And it's off your plate before the county takes the whole thing anyway. If it's lapsed, Cora said, why would your people pay a courtesy for it at all? Tidiness, he said without a blink. You'd be amazed what a company will spend to keep a title tree clean. And if it isn't lapsed, then it's a very old permit on a very dead building, he said, and you'd be a lucky woman to get anything for it. Which is why I'm here today, ma'am, and not next month. He slid the quitclaim across the little motel table and set a pen on top of it, gentle as a man placing a card. Same afternoon money. No lawyers. No waiting on a county board that's already made up its mind about your building. He named a number. It was smaller than the developers. It was insultingly small, and he offered it in the specific, gentle, hurrying way of a man who knows exactly what a thing is worth, and is betting his whole afternoon that the woman across from him does not. And here is the truth that Cora would only understand fully a week later, and that I will let you understand now so you can watch her nearly lose it. A warm mineral spring is common enough. One with clean, clear water is rarer. But such a spring with a documented, unbroken 31-year record of annual assays and a state bottled water source permit that has been kept continuously alive, never once allowed to lapse, that is almost the rarest thing in the whole business. Because the law does not let a bottler put a spring on a label on a promise. A certified source has to prove itself with exactly that, years of documented history, the same source, tested and tested and tested, proving it holds steady. It can take a bottler the better part of a decade and a great deal of money to build that history from scratch on a new spring. Gil had quietly built it over 31 years and left it, complete and legal and waiting, under his wife's name. The landman was not offering pennies for a wet basement. He was offering pennies for one of the only permit-ready artesian sources in the state, and hoping she would sign before she found that out. She very nearly signed. That is the part she never told anyone afterward, the part that shamed her. She had the pen in her hand. $74 in the bank and a heater that ticked and a landman smiling with his mouth, and a courtesy payment that would have gotten her out of the county and into a small, clean apartment somewhere the family could not find her. She had the pen against the paper, and she thought, Gil, I am so tired, and then her thumb, holding the paper down, found the soft creased corner of a different piece of paper in her pocket, and she stopped. Mind the arch, Cora. She put the pen down. I'll want to read it first, she said. The whole file. Before I sign anything. The landman's smile did not change, but something behind it went cold and calculating, and he gathered his quitclaim and said, of course, take your time, and left too quickly for a man with nothing to hide. And Cora sat alone in the ruin with two men wanting the same wet basement for two very different reasons, and knew, at last and all through her, that she was standing on something. The first week of the next month came, the week the receipts were always dated, and Cora drove down to the county records office and did the thing Gil had done 31 times in secret. She paid the annual filing fee in cash from her own thin billfold, and she filed the assay for the year. She had paid a lab out of money she truly did not have to test the water fresh. And the sheet came back, and at the top of it, in the column that never changed, the source read 74 degrees. She filed it under her own name, which was already the name on every sheet before it, and she kept the permit alive one more year with her own 2 hands. It was the most expensive thing she had ever bought with the least money she had ever had. And she did it a week before the condemnation hearing, and she did not fully know why, except that a chain 31 years long should not be broken by the woman it was made for. That is the rung the flop of a story always skips, the small, unglamorous thing the hero does right before the payoff, that costs them and pays nothing yet. Cora paid the fee. Stay with me, because it is about to matter more than she knows. Subscribe now, because the hearing is next, and the hearing is where 31 years of a quiet man's marches come due. She could not fight the developer and the landman in the county with words. She knew that about herself. She was not a woman who won rooms. But the box had taught her something the men had not counted on. The fight had already been won, decades ago, one receipt at a time, by a man who never raised his voice. She did not need to win the room. She only needed to bring the paper into it. So she did not go to the hearing to plead. She went to the county building the week before, and she did the patient. Unglamorous work her husband had taught her by example, without ever saying a word about it. She had the 31 assays certified as a continuous record. She had the source permit pulled and confirmed active, current, in good standing, unlapsed, and she made copies, clean, stamped, official copies, of the deed and the permit both, and on both of them plain as the date. The source of record and the owner of record was one name, her name, recorded years before the estate the county proposed to condemn. She also did one more thing, on the advice of the records clerk, who had turned out to be the only friend Cora had made in the whole county and who had gone quietly furious on her behalf. The clerk knew a man at the state who knew about water, and that man, when he saw the assay file, 31 unbroken years, the same source, the temperature that never moved, got very quiet on the telephone and asked whether the source had ever been submitted to a tasting. A tasting, Cora said. There's an international water tasting held every year, the man said. Municipal waters, spring waters from all over the world. Judges, medals, the whole business. Bottlers watch it like hawks. A source with a file like this one and water that runs this clean, he paused. I'd want to see how it places. If you'll let me, I'd like to enter it. Costs you nothing. Might change everything. I don't understand, Cora said. It's water. It comes out of the ground. How does water win anything? The same way anything wins, he said. By being better than what it's up against and by having somebody who can prove it's been better for a long time. You have 31 years of proof, ma'am. Most people who enter have a good year. You have a good lifetime. My husband's lifetime, Cora said quietly. Then let's find out what he built, the man said. Cora looked out the motel window at the dark shape of the hills where her warm spring welled up clear at 74 degrees, winter and summer, and she said yes. She told the developer nothing. The landman heard nothing from her either. The family, who did not call, learned nothing at all. She sent a case of the water down to the tasting with a stateman's letter and 31 years of assays behind it, and she went to the condemnation hearing with a folder under her arm and her husband's note in her pocket, and she waited to find out whether a quiet man's patience could beat a wrecking list. The hearing room was small and too warm and smelled of old coffee. The developer was there in a good jacket. The landman was there in a worse one, in the back, where men sit when they would rather not be seen. The county read the case against the structure, unsafe, unsound, a hazard, a teardown, value assessed at 0, and asked whether the owner of record wished to be heard. Cora stood up. Her knees were not steady. She did not make a speech, because she had no speech in her, and because Gil had taught her that the paper speaks better than the person. She walked to the front and she laid 3 things on the table in front of the board, one at a time, as you lay down a winning hand you did not know you were holding until that morning. This is the deed, she said. The parcel is recorded in my name. It was recorded in my name years before this hearing, so it was never the estate's to settle, and it is not the county's to condemn out from under me." She laid the second down. "This is a state bottled water source permit for the spring under that building. It is active. It is current. It has never lapsed. It has been kept alive by an unbroken record of annual water assays going back 31 years, the longest continuous source record in this county, and one of the longest in the state." Her voice was steadying now, as a thing steadies when it is true. "You cannot condemn a certified source as a worthless ruin. It is not a wet basement. It is a permitted artesian spring, and the law that governs it is not the same law that governs a teardown." She laid the third down, and it was not paper. It was a single sheet, a fax the state man had sent to the motel front desk at 6 that morning, and Cora had read it standing at the desk in her nightgown with her hand over her mouth. "And as of yesterday," she said, "the water from that spring took a medal at the international tasting. Third in the world, in its class. There is a family bottler already asking to lease the source." She set the fax down on top of the deed and the permit, and she stepped back. "You are welcome to knock down the building. It is only stone, but the water underneath it is mine, it is proven, and it is not going anywhere, because it has held steady at 74 degrees for longer than anyone in this room has been alive." The room did not applaud. It was not that kind of room. But something in it shifted as a jury shifts, and the board members looked at the three papers and then at each other, and the county attorney leaned in and read the permit twice, and the chairman cleared his throat and said the condemnation would be tabled pending review of the source status, which is the sound a wrecking list makes when it dies. The developer left before the gavel. He did not look at Cora. The landman left faster, because a landman who has offered pennies for a medal-winning permitted source in front of a county board has a very bad afternoon ahead of him with his own people, and he knew it. Nobody had shouted. Nobody had been dragged out. The men who wanted the wet basement were undone not by a speech and not by a fight, but by a box of receipts a quiet man had filed every spring for 31 years, paid in cash, in his wife's name. He had won the hearing decades before it was called. He had just not been alive to see it. The bottler was a family concern 3 counties over, grandfather and sons, the kind of business that still answered its own telephone. They came up the hill and stood at the arch and looked at the water welling clear at 74 degrees, and the grandfather took his hat off, which told Cora more about him than any contract could. "You know what most people bring me?" he said, crouching stiffly at the rim, dipping 2 fingers and tasting them like a man tasting broth. "A hole in the ground and a dream. No history, no numbers. I have to say no, because I can't put a source on a label that hasn't proved itself over years. The state won't let me, and neither will my own good name." "And this one?" Cora asked. "This one proved itself before I was born," he said. He stood, put his hat back on, and looked at her a long moment. Whoever kept those records, ma'am, wasn't keeping them for himself. A man doesn't test a spring 31 years running for himself. He does it for somebody he wants taken care of after he's gone. Cora did not trust her voice, so she only nodded. "Well," the grandfather said gently, "he did it right. They drew up a royalty lease against the assay file, she kept the source, they bottled the water, she took a share of every case that left the mountain. It was not $6,000. It was, the lawyer told her carefully, the kind of number that does not run out. The worthless folly, the puddle, the zero on the estate sheet, was going to pay off everything and keep paying, quietly, for the rest of her life, exactly as the spring itself paid out, steady, clear, and in no hurry at all. But money was never what this was about, and Cora knew it, and if you have stayed with me this far, you know it too. The medal was not the reveal. The lease was not the reveal. There was one thing still in the box she had not found, and it was the thing Gil had actually left her. And I have made you wait for it exactly as she had to wait for it. Stay with me for the last of it. It was under the assays, at the very bottom of the box, in an envelope soft with the same handling as the note in her pocket. She found it the night the lease was signed, when she finally had the heart to empty the box all the way down. Her name on the front, in his hand. Inside was the newest assay, the one she had filed herself with her own thin money the week before the hearing, which meant he could not have put it there, which meant he had left the envelope open at the bottom of the box on purpose, 31 years running, waiting for the year she would finally add a sheet of her own. And under it, a letter folded along creases worn as soft as the note. She read it kneeling on the motel floor as she had knelt at the basin. "Cora," it said, "if you are reading this, then you found the arch, and you kept it up long enough to need the whole box, and that means you already know most of it. But you would not know the part that matters, because I never found how to say it out loud, and I am sorry for that. I was not a talker. You knew that when you married me. The spring was the only thing my family ever let me keep. They took the rest, they were always going to take the rest, and I let them, because a man cannot fight his own blood and stay a man. But they laughed at the puddle, and because they laughed at it, they left it alone, and so it was the one thing that stayed mine. And the day I understood that, I understood I wanted it to be yours. You never noticed, but the week I drove up here every year to test the water and file it never moved on the calendar, and it never moved because it was the week I married you. I walked you up to that arch the night I asked you. Do you remember? Before the resort burned, when there was still a light on the cupola. You put your hand in the water and you said it felt warm as a living thing. I never forgot that. Every year on our week I came up, and I tested the water and I filed it under your name, so that whatever else they took, whatever happened to me, the water would still know you, so that you would have one thing that was proven to be yours and could not be argued. 74 degrees, winter and summer. Some things hold steady because somebody decided they would. I decided. It belonged to you before I ever filed a page of it. And it belongs to you still. Mind the arch. The spring will know you by name. And now she did remember. It came back to her all at once, kneeling on the motel floor, a night 40 years gone, the resort still standing then, a string of lights still burning along the cupola, and a young man named Gil, who could barely get a sentence out unless it was about grades or gravel. He had walked her up the marble steps and through the arch when the arch was still open, and he had stood her at the rim of the basin under the burning lights and not said anything for so long that she had laughed at him. "You didn't bring me all this way up the mountain to look at a puddle," she had said. "Put your hand in it," he had said. She had knelt and dipped her fingers in the water, and her whole face had changed. "It's warm," she had said, wondering, warm as a person. "It holds," he had said, "winter and summer. Doesn't matter what happens up top, it just holds." And then, because he was Gil, and because he could not say the large things straight out, he had said the only proposal he had in him. "I'd like something in my life that holds like that. I'd like it to be you." She had said yes at the rim of that basin with her hand still warm, and she had forgotten it, folded it away under 40 years of gutters and grades and grief, until a letter on a motel floor unfolded it again, and she understood that he had never once forgotten it, not for a single spring. Cora sat on the floor of a motel room she could now afford to leave, holding 31 years of a quiet man's marriage in her hands, and understood at last that the number in her bank had never been the number that mattered. $74 had only ever been the surface. 74 degrees was the thing underneath, the thing that held steady while everything on top of it changed, the thing her husband had knelt down and tended 1 week a year for the whole of their life together, so that she would never be left with nothing, no matter what his blood did to her. She had thought 16 years had taught her everything about him. It had taught her the smallest part. The largest part was warm and clear and welling up in the dark under a building the world called a puddle, with her name on every page of it. She did not gloat. There was no one to gloat to, and it would not have been her anyway. The family read about the medal in the county paper, which ran a photograph of the pavilion and a line about the widow who had saved the source from condemnation, and one of them left a message on her telephone that she did not return. She banked the royalty. She fixed the roof of the pavilion first and the cupola second, and she cleaned the marble in the spring chamber by hand until it went soft gold again in honest daylight, and she left the arch open. And on the first Saturday of every month she unlocked the plank door and opened the pavilion to the town for what the county paper took to calling Spigot Day, a warm mineral spring, free. For anyone who wanted to fill a jug, no charge and no fence, the chain link finally hauled off to the scrapyard where it belonged. Children came and put their hands in the basin and said it was warm as a person, and old men came who remembered the resort before it burned, and Cora stood at the rim in a plain quilted jacket and watched the water do the thing it had always done, welling up clear and steady and in no hurry, knowing its own. An old man stopped beside her one Saturday, a jug in each hand, and looked a long while at the water. "I courted my wife on these steps," he said. 1959. There were lights all along that cupola then. "I know," Cora said. "There were. They told us it was gone," the man said, "after the fire. They told us the whole place was gone." "It wasn't gone," Cora said. "It was just quiet. Somebody was minding it." He looked at her then, and something old and grateful moved in his face. "Your husband," he said. "Folks laughed at him, you know. Called it his puddle." "I know what they called it," Cora said. "They were wrong," the old man said simply, and filled his jugs and carried the water down the marble steps into the light, and Cora watched him go, and said nothing, because nothing needed saying. She kept a new record, too, a fresh assay every year, the same week, paid in cash, filed under her name, and, in a fresh ledger she had bought for the purpose, she began to write down the people. Not what they owed, because they owed nothing. Just the ones who came. The widower who filled the same green jug every month. The girl who was studying to be a nurse and swore the water helped her mother's hands. How an old man's face changed when he tasted something from before the fire. She wrote them down not as customers, but as lives, as you write down a thing you mean to keep, and she understood that this was the part of Gil she had married without ever seeing it, the quiet keeping of a good thing for people who could not pay it back. Maybe that is the part most of us miss, standing at the mailboxes of our own lives with our coats buttoned wrong. We measure what we have by the number on the surface, the 74 in the account, the 0 on the appraiser's sheet, the word condemned nailed to the door, and we never think to pull the brick and find out what is welling up warm and steady in the dark underneath, kept alive all these years by somebody who decided it would be. The most valuable thing a person can leave is not money. It is the good they quietly did for someone who could not pay it back, tended 1 week a year, in secret, expecting no thanks and getting none, right up until the day it holds steady under you when everything else gives way. Cora Beale was widowed at 60 with $74 and a building the county wanted gone. She died a great many years later, in her own bed. In the little house she bought at the foot of the hill so she could see the steam rise off the vents on frost mornings. A dead building still breathing, still hers, still warm. She left the source, and the ledger, and the first Saturday of every month, to the nurse who had once come for her mother's hands, with a note in her own careful hand that said only what needed saying. Mind the arch. The water knows its own. It was always yours. If there is a light somebody once meant to keep on for you, or a warmth somebody tended when you were not looking, go and pull the brick, and find it, and then keep it lit for the next one. If you have made it this far into this story, then you already know the answer to the only question that ever mattered here. So tell me, before you go, would you have signed the paper and walked away with the cash in hand, or would you have minded the arch? Stay a moment in the comments and tell me which one you are. And subscribe so that the next quiet story finds you the way the water found her, warm and steady and knowing its own.